Good afternoon, everyone. We are here for the mid-residency review of CCS computing student Akshay Heda. Akshay, you have the floor.
All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Akshay Heda. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a second-year computing student, and this is my mid-residency review. So here's a short table of contents so you can know what I'm going to be talking about and a sort of chronological ordering of when things happened. So first I'll tell you about how I ended up here, and then SB Hacks 5, and then my work in the Vision Research Lab, becoming an SB Hacks organizer, my internship at Amazon, being an officer of the Regent Scholar Association, and then my work in curriculum restructuring. So I grew up in the Seattle area for most of my life, and I moved to the Bay Area in my sophomore year of high school. So I moved to San Ramon, and in San Ramon, I got very involved with robotics. So that was like the one thing that really defined my high school career was competitive robotics. And I participated in Beck's Robotics for 3 years. I worked in a fairly large team. So we were between 10 and 12 people throughout my 3 years. And that was really fun. It really grew my interest in engineering. And I had a lot of fun with those people. And I decided CS would be like the one thing I wanted to focus on after I did some hackathons with members of my robotics team, because they were working in a team, building something, and really coming out with something to show. And so I did a couple of hackathons and decided that CS would be the right path for me. I applied to a bunch of colleges, and I was basically certain that I was going to go to UCSB after college decisions came out. And then I met Phil and Richard at the chancellor's reception, and then again at open house. And I was convinced to join and applied to CCS because I really wanted to take upper division classes earlier. They looked way more interesting than the lower divs. So that was my motivation for applying to CCS. So one of the first major events I went to at UCSB was SB Hacks 5. And this was as I was moving away from all computing classes and sort of joining the CS community. And SB Hacks 5 was really like a great way to see what the CS community at UCSB looked like. To me, it was a ton of people that all somewhat knew each other. Everyone was super friendly and were working together. And it was really collaborative. And I really liked that extension called Gold for Gauchos. And this was to rate my professor ratings in Gold and then export a schedule from Gold to Google Calendar. Some of the interesting things we did was at Friday at 2 a.m., I created a Node.js server to get around cross-origin resource scripting issues and to scrape data from other sites. And then I got to learn how to use OAuth to authenticate with Google and export a calendar to Google Calendar. I also met a lot of really cool people and a lot of people that impacted me thus far. I met AZ, I met Victor Cheng, who's a CCS alumni now, and Danny Cho, another CS alumni. And Victor ended up mentoring my team throughout the event and ended up giving me a ton of great advice. A couple weeks after the event, I asked Victor how to get involved with SB Hacks, and he recommended me to the president of the club. And that's how I ended up as part of SB Hacks. Another thing I was involved with around the same time, early in spring quarter, I went to do an event for open house recruiting for the Regent Scholars. It was a special event so that Regent Scholars' perspectives could be convinced. And I had some conversation with Professor Manjunath in the EC department. I explained my internship with Amazon that I was going to have and my experience in CCS. And I told him that I was interested in doing research, but I didn't really know what kind of research I was going to do. And he offered me a position in his lab. He had just gotten a grant to get some undergraduates, so he offered me one of those positions. So I spent my spring quarter working with 3 other undergraduates in the Vision Research Lab. I was working for a PhD student, Angela Zhang, whose specialization was bioinformatics and machine learning. So what 100 terabytes of data from the National Institutes of Health of just brain imaging data, MRIs, fMRIs, all that sort of stuff. And the researchers were unable to run machine learning models on it because it was just too big. They had this platform within the lab called BISC, which was what their cloud analysis platform for doing data analytics. And they weren't able to use that platform because the data was too big to just put into BISC. So the undergraduate team worked on ingesting that data into their platform and understanding what the data was so that the researchers could use the correct parts and run machine learning models on it. We didn't end up finishing. I think the project was a little too difficult for the experience level of the undergraduates, and the BISC system that we were working on was 10 years old at the time. So it was a little bit of a legacy system and no one really knew how it worked. But I still learned a lot and created a module to help out with annotating data sets. So the picture here is not the data set we were working on. The picture here is a different data set that I helped annotate using some code. And it's of small cell organisms, and it's very detailed pictures of them. Next up, SB organizing team. So this was one of the defining experiences of my college experience so far, being part of the SB organizing team. Last March, I was invited by the team to interview and join because I had reached out to Victor to join, and then they thought that I had met a few of them at SB 5. So we worked on SB 6, which took place last January, and we worked on it for about 9 months. We had a pretty small team, 8 people, which meant that we had to work really hard. I think it's been really good as a learning experience because I've learned how to work on a professional team and how to write emails, how to follow up, a lot of the personal skills, how to communicate ideas, and how to disagree and still be respectful. So SB 6 happened in January. It was a huge event with 350 people, over 36 hours of hacking in Corwin Pavilion, which is the largest venue on campus. I spent almost over 40 hours that weekend at the venue. Didn't sleep a lot because I was organizing and trying to make sure everyone was happy. My personal impact on SB 6 was I was involved in the judging process. So we did something interesting so that hackers could see other people's projects and were able to see what other people were working on during the event. I worked on getting the nice plastic badges, on getting Corwin Pavilion as our venue. I secured some of our sponsors and our keynote speaker, which was CCS alumni Jay Freeman. And as always, SB was a great place to meet a lot of people and really see the CS community come together. So to me, this event was great. It ran fairly smoothly and I was very satisfied with it. I know there's things that we could do better, but given the size of our team, I think it was a great event. Pictured here are my friends, Yuval, Liron, Lena, and my roommate, Brandon. Next up is my internship at Amazon. So I was a Amazon Future Engineer as the intern. Future Engineers was their first and second year program. It's pretty new. It only had about 100 interns between Canada and America. I was based out of Seattle, which, as I mentioned, was my hometown, and that was great. I was in AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is the enterprise division of Amazon, on the Amazon Connect team. And to me, being in Seattle was honestly the best part because I got to do a lot of fun things in Seattle, explore living in the city, and go to some concerts and see old friends and family. So Amazon Connect is what Amazon calls a cloud contact center. And what this really just means is it's call center software. So when you pick up the phone and call an agent for help, it routes you and connects you to an agent and then uses VoIP to have your call connect to an agent on the web. And the whole point of Amazon Connect existing was to create a easy to spin up call center that scales to a ton of agents. So one of the large customers was Intuit, which does tax. And for them, they have very few agents during off season, but then they have tens of thousands of agents during peak tax season. So they need to be able to scale to that size. I was working on the then unreleased chat functionality. So I was working on the team just a month and a half before release of being able to chat with an agent. So this would be going onto Intuit's site and then on their site chatting with an agent for tax help. The system was basically built on this thing called a serverless architecture. And this is where they use, instead of having processes running, they use AWS Lambda, which is function as a service for everything. And so every time a function is called, it spins up a machine, runs the function, and then spins down the machine. And what this means is that they didn't have to provision hardware for running bigger loads. They could just call more AWS Lambda functions, and AWS Lambda would spin up more instances to deal with scaling. So that was a very interesting concept to me, and working around that actually had some interesting problems. My specific intern project was adding integration for Amazon Lex. So Amazon Lex is basically Amazon Alexa, but as a chatbot. It's the same technology behind that. And Amazon Connect at this point had some integration with Amazon Lex, but it wasn't a full integration. Amazon Lex supported these things, these additional message types that weren't in Amazon Connect yet. And the specific one I focused on was these things called response cards. So pictured in the slide is what a response card looks like in Amazon Lex. And it's basically a picture, a title, a subtitle, and then a couple of options. My job was to be able to have this message format within Amazon Connect Chat. And so I worked on the backend integration in Java on their serverless platform. And then I wrote a React component for the front end. And this was very interesting because the React front end was very dumb in some senses. It didn't really know anything except for the data provided to it. So it was interesting trying to create this functionality without having much state on the front end. I wasn't able to finish when I left. I left with a semi-functional prototype, but it just wasn't the right time to deploy this kind of feature because the team was gearing up for the launch of the chat functionality. So they were working on security reviews and finishing last-minute features that were necessary for launch. So I couldn't actually push this to production. I also made a ton of mistakes along the way of building this project. I accidentally woke someone up at 5 a.m. by causing a high severity ticket, and that was kind of bad. But in general, I think I learned a lot because of it. I learned how to code properly and how process works in industry. Next, the Regent Scholars Association. So this is an organization very dear to my heart. One of the large reasons I came to UCSB was being admitted as a Regent Scholar and knowing that there's a network of these people at UCSB that really work to make each other better. I'm currently the secretary of RSA, and my role in this is planning the events for the quarter, along with planning specific events throughout the year. So the organization puts on mostly coffee hours with professors and then dinners with professors, along with a couple events for professional development and social development. So I've put on a couple of coffee hours and dinners with CS faculty, including a dinner with Professor Lakshanov, which is the bottom picture, and then a coffee hour with Professor Matney. We're also fairly involved with recruiting Regent Scholars. So we have an event during open house, and then we send a fairly large delegation of students to chancellor's receptions. So I'm very sad that we didn't get to go to San Jose this year, but we'll do that next year. And then we get to put on an event with Chancellor Yang, which pictured is the officer team with Chancellor Yang, who we all love.
Just a question on that, Akshay. Is that Regent Scholars across the campus, or is it Regent Scholars specifically in CS? Or
No, this is Regent Scholars across the campus.
Gotcha.
Yeah, We have a ton of CS majors. I'd say 30% of Regent scholars are CS majors. So we end up doing a lot of CS events, and you see
Gotcha.
a lot of them in the CS department.
Gotcha.
Next up is curriculum restructuring. I work with Richard on reworking the lower division CS curriculum. So this is CS 16, 24, and 32. My primary focus has been on new lab ideas and creating outlines for the courses. So figuring out which topics need to go in which courses, what new topics to add to the courses, and which ones don't make sense for CS majors anymore. And so this has been a very interesting, almost tug of war where a lot of people have very strong opinions, and it's really figuring out how to put together all these different topics in a way that everyone's happy and it makes sense. Pictured in the middle is one of the interesting labs we've been working on, which is basically students solve a maze using depth first search. And this is pretty cool because we're adding this as part of CS 16. So we'll have students doing very interesting and somewhat difficult labs early on. Moving on to my future plans. So in the short term, in the next year, I'm maintaining my involvement with SB Hacks. So I'll be the logistics team leader and then one of the organization's overall leaders for planning SB Hacks 7. We finished recruitment. We did a ton of interviews and we've recruited some great people, including Daniel and Ben here. And we're having our first meeting tomorrow, so I'm very excited for that. I'll be returning back to Amazon Connect as an SDE intern. And although they've already told me that it's going to be a virtual internship, which is not optimal, I'm still very excited to see the people I worked with last year and get back to solving interesting problems and to see how that product has evolved in the time that I haven't been there. I also plan to continue my involvement with Regent Scholars Association. I don't know if I'll continue to be secretary or what position I'll take next year, but I still want to stay very involved with that. I'm really, really hoping to get to go on some of the recruitment efforts next year because those seem very fun. But I definitely want to plan more events with professors and get the CS department more involved. I also want to try to take some graduate classes next year. I've been eyeing scalable web systems with Professor Bryce Bowe because I think it's very similar to the work I do at my internship. And I think it touches on the same topics. So I think my experience would both make me better at the class and the class would make me better at in industry. In the long term, I plan to go into industry after college. My personal goal is to work on consumer products or products that face end customers. My personal passion is really seeing features that I develop or have created actually affect how people work and how they work. So I've always had a little bit of like love for business as well. I was almost a business major before I picked CS. And so I might do product management or something like that. My goal is to hopefully find a position in Seattle downtown or San Francisco downtown. Last summer, I realized I really like living in downtown because you can just walk around and go places. You don't have to drive everywhere, which is really nice. I'm still not sure if I want to go into a large company or a startup. I think that one's been pretty tough for me to figure out just because I haven't really tried working in a startup, but we'll see what happens. All right. Thank you guys for listening to my mid-residency review. I'll take any questions.
All right. So I don't know how well this will work, but let's try it. If everyone can unmute their mic for a second, and let's try giving Akshay a round of applause, and let's see if this works. But unmute yourselves first. So ready? 3, 2, 1. Here we go. All right, and it kind of worked.
Kind of. I heard like one dominant clap.
Yeah. All right. So, Richard, what questions do you have for Akshay?
Sure. So, I guess when you were talking about your Amazon internship and you you pulled off like a high severity alert for everybody, and I know that everybody's on call and wears pagers. Can you explain a little bit what you did, if you can, like if you're not breaking
So
any NDAs?
yeah, I can honestly. So alongside my intern project didn't go that great, mostly because I was on a backend team working on a front end project, and there was only 2 front end engineers over like 7 teams, so they were like overworked like all hell to just get the product to launch. So I couldn't really ask that many questions. So I worked on some other backend projects, and one of the things they needed was load testing before launch. So I worked on a load testing framework, and because of the way their environments were set up, you couldn't load test on beta. You could only do you couldn't really, you could load test on beta, but you'd have to like change beta completely to load test on it. So we were doing small scale tests on production, and to basically like every 1 minute run a check on some specific feature that is still working on production. And so we left these running overnight to make sure that they were working. And one specific feature that I was working on had a tiny bug where you could accumulate connections.
Uh-oh.
So I left it running overnight on production. And the next morning, they're like, we have a Sev2 on production. This is really bad. We don't know why. And then they checked whose account was causing the problems, and it was mine. It was my load testing or framework that was like testing one specific feature, and I'd left it running all night, and it had just accumulated a bunch of connections and like threw a bunch of errors. And so someone had to wake up at 5 a.m. for that. I felt really bad.
It happens, so no worries.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that makes sense. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I've heard
didn't
of
really
worse
put that
interns.
project in my present.
I recall this was maybe back in 2000, I don't know, 13 or 14. An intern took down Netflix for I think like almost a day during the holiday season.
Yikes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Surprisingly, the intern was pretty chill about it, because like all these engineers hopped on to like the Sev2 thread. It's like, what's going on? What's going on? The guy's like, my bad, and then just like it's like the intern was really super cool about it, like a little bit too cool about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. So, yeah, Akshay, great presentation. I don't have any questions. So we have about 5 minutes for questions from the group here. So if anyone would like to ask a question, you can go to the participant list and raise your hand, and I'll call on you. Or you can just type your question into the chat, and Richard or I will read it. So questions for Akshay. Yes, I see Adam has his hand raised. And so Adam, go ahead.
Okay, Akshay, well done. That was a really good presentation, first of all. What would you say is the thing that you enjoy the most during your 2 years at UCSB and like CCS?
Honestly, I've really enjoyed clubs, but the other thing I've really enjoyed is when I picked random roommates last year, I ended up with 2 CS majors as my roommates. And so my entire core friends group is a bunch of CS majors, and that happened kind of randomly. And so I really enjoy that, like, a lot of our conversations will just like talk about problems and interesting solutions. And so like on a regular day, I'll just be able to talk about CS classes with my friends and then discuss about like the things that we're talking about in those CS classes.
Okay. I like it.
Cool. Anyone else? Yes, Daniel, go ahead.
Hi. So also, I agree, actually, very good presentation. I really like the PowerPoint layout. So I was curious, seems like you've done like a lot of stuff. What's like your balance between like your extracurriculars versus your classes and stuff like that?
I think my focus has always been like a little bit towards extracurriculars. So I don't take as many units as a lot of other CCS majors. I keep it at around 16 most quarters. And so as a result, I'm able to focus more on extracurriculars. So my various organizations that I'm involved with. So I try to split it a little bit more towards organizations in terms of like overall balance, but in terms of time, it is still mostly classes. I don't know if that really answers it clearly, but I guess I take less classes so that I have time for organizations.
Wait, what do you mean by your time is more spent for classes, but you put more effort into extracurriculars?
Classes, I feel like classes take a lot of time, but in terms of like what I'm thinking about when I'm not thinking about, like when I have free time, what I think about is my organization. So like
Oh, I see.
the various problems that SB Hex needs to solve, like I'm usually thinking about those, or like what our next meeting will entail, what we need to do. That's always on like the back of my mind, because I don't really think about like that for, I don't have that thoughts for my classes. Like classes are pretty straightforward. You just get the work done, but I'm always thinking about how to make my organizations better.
Do you have a favorite class from this year or last year?
I think 130B ended up being more fun than I expected. Thus far, I've very much enjoyed 171 and 160, which I'm taking this quarter. Even though they're fairly difficult, they've been pretty interesting.
And actually, for folks who might be watching this, if we put this online, can you say a bit about, you mentioned 130B, 171, and the third one was, I believe, 160? Is that right?
160.
160. Can
Yeah,
you just say a little bit about what each of those
algorithms
is?
and data structures too. 130B. Yeah. So 130B is algorithms and data structures too. And that class was pretty fun because it was a mix between like the concepts that I use to solve leet code problems or interview problems, but also the theory behind them and the techniques used behind them. So I really like that class just because it's a mix of things that I already knew and then formalizing them into a computer science theory. 171 is distributed systems. That class is pretty interesting just because you're presented a solution and then the fun is trying to figure out why the solution might not work in certain scenarios. So it's almost a game of trying to poke holes in different solutions and trying to think about when you can use this and when it doesn't work. Also, thus far, the class has been, you already know how to do a lot of the things, but here's how you conceptualize them or how you think about these problems. 160 is compilers, and that class is pretty tough, I'd say. Like the programming assignments take a lot of time, but at the same time, that class pulls concepts from a ton of other classes. So we're using formal languages and automata, we're using algorithms, we're using data structures, we're using programming practices, runtime. It draws from so many different classes I've taken and like puts them together into one thing. And so that's pretty interesting.
Cool. All right. Any other questions or comments from folks? All right, well then let's once again thank Akshay for a great MRR presentation. And I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording now.